Anaya Sharma entered her wedding night with dreams of a new beginning, while Arjun Rathor's family waited in silence, believing a deadly lie that would end her life before sunrise. The wedding of 24-year-old Anaya Sharma was the kind of event people in Jaipur would remember for years. The garden venue was decorated with golden lights that wrapped around every pillar, and bright marigold garlands framed the entrance like a gateway to a royal celebration. Guests arrived in colorful clothes, exchanging smiles, blessings, and admiration for the arrangements. The air carried the scent of roses, incense, and festive spices. It was the perfect blend of tradition and luxury, the type of wedding that showed unity between two respected families. Anaya moved gracefully through the crowd, her red bridal attire shimmering under the chandeliers. Friends whispered about her future, imagining her life as the new daughter-in-law of the influential Rathor family. Arjun, the groom, stood proudly beside her during rituals, and their photos captured the illusion of a peaceful beginning. Everyone believed the couple had stepped into a promising future filled with comfort, respect, and stability. As the evening progressed, music echoed across the venue. Dancers performed, relatives posed for pictures, and the buffet tables stayed crowded. Nothing seemed out of place. Even the elders, often the first to sense tension, appeared relaxed and satisfied. Every moment suggested harmony, yet beneath this glowing celebration, an unseen shadow had already entered the story. Hidden behind smiles were doubts and fears that had not yet surfaced. No one could predict that the same night filled with joy would soon turn into a nightmare. For now, the wedding remained a grand event, unaware of the tragedy waiting just beyond the curtain of celebrations. The day before the wedding, when the Sharma family was busy finalizing decorations and welcoming relatives, a quiet tension settled inside the Rathor household. An anonymous envelope had arrived without a return address or explanation. At first, it looked like a simple piece of mail, something that could have been ignored or misplaced. But the moment it was opened, everything changed. Inside was a photocopy of what appeared to be a medical report, with Anaya's name typed at the top. The paper claimed she was HIV positive, but it showed no official stamp, no hospital letterhead, and no doctor's signature. It was simply a sheet designed to create panic. Instead of treating it with caution or considering it a possible attempt to sabotage the marriage, the groom's relatives allowed fear to take over. They kept the discovery hidden from everyone, including Anaya and her family. The report looked suspicious, but the emotional shock it delivered pushed them into silence and suspicion, rather than reason or verification. They convinced themselves it was better to wait until after the ceremony to confirm anything. Throughout the wedding preparations, the Rathor family behaved normally on the outside, greeting guests and discussing arrangements. On the inside, however, they were restless. Small gestures revealed their unease, tightened expressions, hushed movements, and sudden pauses during discussions. Instead of seeking medical guidance or verifying the document with professionals, they allowed the unproven claim to grow in their minds. The wedding day approached with grand excitement for everyone else, but for the groom's family, the celebration had already been overshadowed by fear. The forged report had planted a seed of doubt that would soon spiral into irreversible tragedy. After the final guests left and the wedding lights began to dim, the Rathor household shifted from celebration to suspicion. While Anaya rested after the long ceremonies, the groom's relatives gathered quietly in a separate room, their minds still trapped by the forged medical report. The joy of the wedding night no longer mattered to them. They believed they had uncovered a dangerous secret, even though nothing had been verified. The silence of the house made their anxiety stronger, pushing them to take reckless actions. Their first step was to search Anaya's belongings. They went through her suitcase, checking every zipper and pocket as if they expected to find proof hidden inside. They examined her makeup kit, personal documents, and even her medicines. Every item they touched only increased their frustration because nothing supported the false claim. The absence of evidence, instead of calming them, made them more desperate to justify their fear. They then checked her phone, scrolling through messages and photos without her knowledge. Every conversation they read was ordinary, showing friendships, college memories, and family moments. Yet the family convinced themselves that she must have hidden something. Their suspicion had reached a level where logic no longer mattered. With each passing minute, their belief in the forged report grew stronger simply because they had already accepted it as truth. The atmosphere inside the mansion became dense with tension. The family, instead of questioning the document, questioned Anaya's character. By the time the night deepened, their minds were filled with conclusions they had created on their own, unaware that their unchecked fear was guiding them toward a tragic decision. As the night settled over the mansion, the growing suspicion inside the Rathore family quietly turned into a dangerous plan. They convinced themselves that the forged medical report was real and that Anaya had intentionally kept a life-threatening secret from them. Instead of seeking clarity from medical professionals or giving her a chance to explain, they allowed fear, pride, and ignorance to dictate their actions. What began as doubt had now twisted into a belief that they needed to take control of the situation on their own. They decided to isolate her under the guise of a traditional wedding ritual. When relatives suggested that the newlyweds should rest, the family intervened and guided Anaya into a separate guest room, claiming it was part of a custom meant to bring good luck. The room was beautifully decorated with flowers, but its purpose had been changed into something far darker. Anaya, tired from the long day, had no reason to suspect anything unusual. She assumed the new surroundings were part of the elaborate wedding traditions she had grown up hearing about. Once she entered, the door was quietly locked from the outside. The long hallway remained silent as the lights were dimmed, making it seem as though the entire home had gone to sleep. Inside the locked room, Anaya rested peacefully, unaware that she had been confined. Outside, the family gathered again, whispering through tense expressions and restless movements. The mansion, which should have welcomed her with warmth as a new bride, had turned into a place of hidden intentions, setting the stage for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Late into the night, when the mansion had fallen quiet and most relatives were asleep, the Rathore family allowed their fear and misunderstanding to harden into a fatal decision. The forged medical report, never verified or questioned, had become their only truth. In their minds, they believed they were protecting their household from shame and danger, even though no real threat existed. The darkness of the hour seemed to encourage their worst thoughts, pushing them further away from reason. They gathered outside the locked guest room where Anaya slept, still unaware of the growing hostility. The corridor was silent except for the faint sound of ceiling fans and the ticking of a distant clock. Every moment they hesitated, their anxiety increased, convincing them they had no choice but to act. They believed they were addressing a problem that, in reality, had never existed. Their panic now outweighed any sense of humanity or justice. Inside the room, Anaya remained peacefully asleep, unaware of the danger closing in around her. The family's actions were driven not by evidence but by fear, superstition, and social pressure. Their minds had transformed a simple forged document into a life-changing threat. The night that should have marked the beginning of her new life became the moment that sealed her fate. When they finally carried out their plan, it happened quickly, fueled by confusion and collective fear, rather than deliberate cruelty. By the time dawn approached, the tragedy was complete. The young bride who had entered the home just hours earlier with hope and trust was no longer alive, and the weight of their irreversible actions was already beginning to settle over the household like an unspoken shadow. In the early hours of the morning, once the terrible act had been carried out, the Rathore family shifted from panic to concealment. Fear of consequences replaced the fear that had driven their actions. The once celebratory mansion now felt heavy with silence, and every family member avoided each other's eyes. They knew the truth could not be hidden for long, yet they began planning to rewrite the events of the night. Their goal was simple: erase every sign of what had actually happened and create a version of events that would protect them from suspicion. They entered the guest room carefully, removing anything that might hint at conflict. Items were rearranged, surfaces were wiped, and the space was staged to resemble a medical emergency. They removed the forged report from among their belongings and burned it in a metal container behind the house, watching the paper curl into ashes. It was their way of removing the spark that had begun everything, even though the damage it caused could never be undone. They rehearsed their story, repeating the same sequence of events until it sounded natural. According to their plan, they would claim that Anaya had suddenly fallen unconscious in the night due to an unknown health condition. They believed that their social influence and wealth would help them control the narrative. Yet despite their efforts, small cracks were already visible. Relatives noticed inconsistencies in their faces, tension, trembling hands, unusual silence. The calm they attempted to create never fully settled. Beneath the surface, guilt and fear moved like an undercurrent, hinting that the truth would eventually rise, no matter how carefully they tried to bury it. When morning arrived, the Rathore family tried to maintain a calm facade, but the atmosphere in the mansion was noticeably strained. Relatives sensed something was wrong the moment they saw the forced expressions and the hurried announcement that Anaya had collapsed during the night. Her parents, shocked and confused, demanded a medical explanation. The vague and inconsistent responses from the Groom's family only deepened their suspicion. What was supposed to be a second day of celebration quickly shifted into a scene filled with grief, uncertainty, and rising doubt. When authorities were informed, the Groom's family attempted to discourage further investigation, insisting that it was a natural and sudden medical issue. However, the police, noticing the irregularities in the statements and the discomfort among family members, called for an autopsy. This decision immediately unsettled the Rathores, who had hoped their version of the story would be accepted without questions. The autopsy revealed clear signs of physical harm, contradicting the family's claims. Once this information reached the police, they began interviewing every person who had been present in the mansion. The inconsistencies grew more obvious. One family member described the night differently from another. Timelines clashed, details shifted, and the act of hiding the truth became harder with every question. Further suspicion arose when detectives examined the house. Security cameras captured movements in the hallway long after the wedding rituals ended, movements that did not match the story the family had crafted. A neighbor later mentioned seeing several relatives awake unusually late, pacing nervously near the guest wing. Piece by piece, the carefully constructed facade began to fall apart. The investigation was no longer just about a sudden death. It had turned into a search for the truth behind a crime hidden beneath fear and deception. As the investigation deepened, the police uncovered the most unexpected twist of the entire case. Digital forensic experts examined the devices in the Rathore household and discovered traces of a document identical to the forged medical report. However, it had not originated from within the family. Instead, the file was linked to a computer belonging to someone outside the home, a rejected suitor who had once hoped to marry Anaya. He had held a long-standing grudge after the Sharma family chose to decline his marriage proposal months earlier. His intention was never to cause a death. His goal had been to break the alliance between the two families by planting doubt and distrust. The wedding proceedings successfully had angered him. Pushing him to attempt one final act of spite, he created the fake medical report and anonymously delivered it to the Rathores. When confronted, he admitted to sending the document but insisted he had not predicted how far the family would take it. His confession revealed the chain of events that turned a petty act of revenge into a life-ending tragedy. The truth showed that the crime was not the result of any real medical condition or secret, but of ignorance, panic, and the destructive power of misinformation. Investigators concluded that the Rathore family had allowed fear and social anxiety to override rational thinking. With the discovery of the true origin of the forged report, arrests were made across both households. The suitor faced charges for fraud and instigation, while the family members who acted violently were held responsible for Anaya's death. The case gained national attention, serving as a painful reminder of how dangerous rumors, stigma, and unchecked assumptions can be. What began as a joyous union ended in tragedy, all because a lie was allowed to grow unchecked in the shadows of fear.